This is the third of our percentages lessons. You're going to need paper and pencil. Again, we're looking at finding the percentage of a number or a quantity. So as we know, 100% makes up a whole item. In this case, it's a pair of boxer shorts. If 70% of the shorts are nylon, we need to work out how much of the shorts are made from cotton. Well, that's just a simple sum. We've got our 100% being the total thing. We have to subtract 70, and we're left with 30% of the shorts are made from cotton. With our Minecraft t-shirt, we know that 40% of the t-shirt is made from nylon, 25% is cotton, and we need to work out what percentage of that shirt is polyester. So remember that 100% is the whole shirt. We know two bits of it. We know 25% and 40% are used up. So if we add those together, we get 65. And if we subtract that from the 100, 35% of the shirt is polyester. Right, let's recap finding 50% of a number. Remember, 50% is 1/2. So by finding 50% of 800 is 400, because that is half of it. 50% of 44, half of that is 22. 50% of 140, half of it is 70. 50% of 148, again, if you're ever faced with a tricky one, do yourself a sum. 2 into the 1 does not go. 2 into 14 goes 7 times. 2 into 8 goes 4. So 50% of 148 is 74. 50% of 86, divide that by 2 to find half of it. So 50% of 86 is 43. The final one, 50% of 64, again divide it by 2 to find half of it. So 50% of 64 is 32. Again, we're going to do a few questions to recap what we already know. 25% of a number is simply 1/4 of that number. 25% of 16, we divide it by 4 to get 4. 25% of 48, again we divide it by 4 to get 12. 25% of 240, a little bit tricky, so why don't we write ourselves a sum. 4 into 240, 4 into 2 does not go, 4 into 24 is 6, 4 into 0 is 0. So 25% of 240 is 60. And our final one, 25% of 84, we divide the number by 4. So 4 into 8 goes twice, and 4 into 4 goes once. So 25% of 84 is 21. Again, a little bit more revision on our first two percentage lessons. This time we're finding 20% of a number. Finding 20% of a number, well, 20% is 1/5, so we're going to divide each number of the numbers by 5. 450 divided by 5 to give me 20%. We'll write ourselves out a division step sum. 5 into 4 does not go. 5 into 45 is 9, and 5 into 0 is 0. So 20% of 450 is 90. Our next one, we're going to find 20% of 105. Again, we have to divide it by 5 to find 1/5 of it. 5 into 10 goes twice, 5 into 5 goes once. So 20% of 105 is 21. Okay, I'd like you to use your paper and pencil to work out the last two questions, finding 20% of each number. Okay, let's do them together now. So 20% of 75, so we have to find 1/5 of it by dividing it by 5. So 5 into 75. 5 into 7 goes once, bring our 2 left over. 5 into 25 is 5. So 20% of 75 is 15. And my final one we could do mentally. We're finding 1/5 of 25, which is 5. The wedding dress costs £400. There is 20% off, and as we just did on our last few questions, we all know that 20% is 1/5. So we need to work out 1/5 of 400 to work out how much is taken off the price of the dress. 5 into 40 is 8. 5 into 0 is 0. So there's £80 off the wedding dress. If I want to work out the new cost of the dress, I would do myself a subtraction sum, and it would be £320 for the dress in the sale. A few more questions to recap our previous lessons. So in this case, we're going to find 10% of these four numbers. 10% is 1/10, so we have to divide each of these numbers by 10 to find 10%. Pretty straightforward. When I'm dividing by 10, first one, simply 96. 330 leaves me 33 if I divide it by 10. 510 is 51. And the final one, 160 divided by 10 to give me 10% is 16. Now we've got to find 75% of each of these four numbers. 75% is 3/4 as a fraction. So we need to find 3/4 of 96. So we will need to divide by the bottom, which is 4, then multiply by the top, which is 3. So 4 into 96 first. 4 into 9 goes twice, 1 over. 4 into 16 goes 4. Then we have to times that by 3 to give me 72. So 75% of 96 is 72. My next one, I have to find 1/4 of it, so I divide it by 4 first. 4 into 16 is 4, 4 into 0 is 0. Then I times it by the top because I want 3/4, which is 75%, giving me 120. So 75% of 160 is 120. Okay, I would now like you to work out the answers to the remaining two questions using your paper and pencil. You may choose to pause the video at this point. Okay, let's go through them together. So 75% of 32 divided by 4, divided by the bottom, gives me 8, multiplied by the top, gives me 24. So 75% of 32 is 24. And the final one, I find 1/4, which is 20%. So 4 into 80 gives me 20, times it by the top, which is 3, giving me 60. So 75% of 80 is 60. We're going to find 30% of each of these numbers. So remember, 30% is 3/10. And the tip tells us to find 10%, so we divide it by 10, then multiply it by 3. A lot of this can be done mentally. So 10% of 80 is 8, times it by 3, gives me 24. So 30% of 80 is 24, because the 8 is 10%, and we want 3 of those. My next one, 10% of 90 is 9. That's 10% of 90 is 9. And I want 3 of those for 30, so 27. So 90 is where we started. 30% of that is 27. My next one, 210. 10% of 210 divided by 10 is 21. And I have to times that by 3 to give me 63. So 30% of 210 is 63. My final one, 10% of 450 is 45. But we want 30%, so we have to times that by 3. 45 times 3 is 135. So 450 is where we started. 30% of that is 135. There are 20 children in a class. We know that 50% are boys. So to work out 50% of a number, we divide it by 2 to get half of it. So you know 10 of them are boys. We know that 25% go to school dinners. 25% is 1/4. So 1/4 of 20, so you divide it by 4 to get 5. 10% of the children wear glasses. So 10% is 1/10. Simply divide the number by 10. 20 divided by 10 is 2. 5% have blonde hair. Well, if 10% is 2, half of that gives me 5%. So 1. My last one, 75% own a mobile phone. Remember, 75% is 3/4. So we divide by the bottom, which is 4, and multiply by the top. So 20 divided by 4 gives me 5, and then I multiply by the top, which was 3, to give me an answer of 15 children own a mobile phone.